recently beat Bloodborne, and by recently, I mean like a month ago, but after sitting on it for some time, I have enough thoughts about it for a review. I'll begin by describing my relationship with the From Software's Souls series in general, as even if Bloodborne isn't directly connected to Demon Souls or Dark Souls, its format is almost identical in the sense that you're tossed into a big world with little knowledge where scary monsters take turns beating your existence into a pulp. That is, until you get a grasp on how to play the game, or as other people have described, until one gets good. Now, the only one I've played is Dark Souls, and that was just last year. I quite liked it. If you watched my year-end favorite games list of 2014 with my friend, you'll see it was my number 6 favorite game of the year. I spent an insane amount of time in that game and still did not manage to beat it. It took me a long time to get good. But I did eventually get good, or at least good enough to beat Ornstein and Smog, a pair of bosses that some would declare to be the hardest in the game. I would agree. It took me 70 plus attempts, and I took a 9-month break between it all. But I still did it. I beat him. But no, I never beat the game. I did beat Bloodborne, though. Bloodborne, though similar, is different enough to be seen as a complete game on its own. And it was different enough that I did beat it, so give me credit there. The game takes place in the dying Gothic city of Yharnam, which I find to be a wonderful setting. The environments look wonderful, allowing you to see incredible stretches of the city, places that you will likely go to later on in the game. You're dropped in the city, sent to dispatch people, monsters, and bosses until the game tells you to stop, or until you smash the controller in half against your knees. Eventually, you'll reach a boss that's harder than the tension building up between your clenched teeth from how many times you've died, and they'll destroy you many times over. But, if you're persistent and willing to adapt, you'll overcome them and feel an amazing sense of accomplishment, or at least I did. And if you're enjoying yourself, you'll likely continue on until you've completed the game. Okay, it's a little bit more than that. The combat itself feels very tight, and the game shoots to be played at a faster pace than Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a lot of circle strafing or hiding behind the shield, while this one is quickly getting attacks in. The game includes a mechanic where you can regain recently lost health by quickly attacking an enemy. Instead of a shield, you're given a firearm to stagger your enemies. A well-placed shot leaves the enemy open for visceral attacks, which deal massive damage and grant some health. And you'll need all the health you can get. Healing comes from blood vials, items usually dropped by enemies or found, which you slap against yourself to regain a bit of health. The only other way to get health is returning to the Hunter's Dream from checkpoints, but one shouldn't be relying on that. Checkpoints in the game are few and far in between. Rather than a linear progression that drops a checkpoint for sufficient progress, the design of the environment is created with checkpoints in mind. Often, after making a decent amount of progress through the environment, you won't find another checkpoint. Instead, you'll open up a shortcut to that last checkpoint. The game does a wonderful job at feeling like a twisted, intertwined pathway. Sure, the level design may make a little sense in the scope of an actual city that people live in, but as a video game, it works wonderfully. And again, throughout the entire game, the world does look wonderful. This is one of the best looking games out there, at least in my opinion. It does what it wants to. Big, enormous environments, and enemies ranging from the simple spooky to the downright unsettling, and it does all that incredibly well. You may remember some paragraphs ago saying that you'll play until the game tells you to stop. While being a silly joke, it's also kind of true depending on how involved with the story you are. The plot is largely hidden from the player. If the player wants to go searching for answers, they can, and, depending on how hard they look, it can leave them all sorts of lost and confused. While some might dislike this method of storytelling, it works greatly in Bloodborne. It creates a sense of question to what you'll uncover next in the scope of the city, while paralleling the sense of both dread and intrigue and wondering what the next big enemy will be. The director of the game says the story is purposely left up to interpretation to the players, and it's incredible how deep one can get into the lore with what they're given. It's because the game doesn't give players expositions, it gives players facts. If I were to present this review in the style of the game, it would probably only talk about when I got the game, how I ended the game, and a picture of my tear-drenched, calloused thumbs. With only the flavor text of the items, the short conversations with the NPCs, and the various notes scattered about, many people can come up with all sorts of theories and ideas, and it's really up to you to decide which one's the most correct. Fun fact, I thought Bloodborne was kind of a silly name that sounds a bit weird, but it makes way more sense as the title now that I think I understand the story of the game. Maybe people knew that and I'm just dense, but who knows. But the involvement of the story is ultimately up to you, the player, if you care. If you don't, you can run through the game slashing people, leveling up, and just playing for the reward and accomplishment alone. If you couldn't tell, I quite liked Bloodborne, but I wouldn't call it a perfect game. There are a couple things that just rub me the wrong way. The game has chalice dungeons, which are easily the worst part of the game. They're tight underground environments with little variation, and they make the game boring. And how can you make a game where you stab tentacle beasts with a sword the size of your torso boring? put it in the same uninspired environment for hours on end. Granted, the dungeons are entirely optional, but some things are locked off to be in just the dungeons, including the best attachments for your weapons. It makes the game kind of grindy. Speaking of grind, blood vials are not a good idea. The Estus flask from Dark Souls worked fine. Limited uses, refills at bonfires on death. Blood vials work fine if you're in an area where enemies drop them frequently enough, but anywhere else, like, say, a chalice dungeon, or after multiple deaths against the same boss, causes the player to run out and have to go elsewhere for some time to get some more. I don't know anyone who thought this was better than the Estus flask. Finally, a minor gripe is the co-op in PvP. The way to play with a friend or against other players requires use of certain items at the same time in the same place, along with presumably a palm reading and aligning of the stars and a couple of coin tosses, because it seems to be incredibly finicky the few times I've been asked to co-op with a friend. Likewise, players only battle each other when one is trying to co-op with a buddy, usually. It's a drag on the people who want to co-op with their buddies for fun, as well as for the people that enjoy the challenge of fighting other players. Ultimately, though, these are just minor gripes, as the game for me was a wonderful experience solo. I didn't really want to play with friends, and I didn't really want to play against other people. I really liked the isolated experience. Bloodborne was a truly wonderful game that I thoroughly enjoyed playing to completion. Yes, there are minor issues, but it doesn't come close to outweighing how much I enjoyed playing the game. I'm sure there are other things that I neglected, but I like to think that I got all the important stuff across. Play it if it sounds or looks appealing to you. If it doesn't, I absolutely understand. This isn't a game for everybody, but it was very much a game for me.